إعلان مهم.
重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Anuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Good evening, good afternoon, all colleagues, members and observers of the Human Rights Council. The president had to first negotiate with the new chair. There's a new one. But excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I hereby declare open the 14th meeting of the 52nd session of the Working Group of the Universal Periodic Review. We will now proceed with the review of Singapore. Before we begin, please let me remind you that all delegations should upload their oral statements through the online system of inscription of the list of speakers, the events, before the opening of the review they intend to address. In accordance with the Human Rights Council Resolution 5/1, the review is based on the national report and the compilation of UN information and the summary of stakeholders' information, both prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Before I give the floor to the delegation, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the government of Singapore for its support in funding the live broadcasting of the 52nd session of the Working Group of the UPR, and of course for its full support to the UPR process through this participation. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency, Ambassador Jayaratnam, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Singapore, to introduce the delegation. Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Singapore is proud to participate in our 4th UPR. We are building a society where our people feel safe and secure, live within harmonious and cohesive communities, and lead meaningful lives and feel proud of Singapore. The issues we face, especially being a multi-religious and multi-ethnic society, are increasingly complex and cross-cutting in this fast-changing world. Singapore sees the UPR as a valuable opportunity to take stock of the progress we have made, while reviewing the areas where we can do better. Since our last UPR, we have undertaken significant legal and policy initiatives to implement the recommendations we accepted. We recognize that responding to today's challenges is not enough. To help us chart our course forward, we have regularly engaged international human rights mechanisms through, among others, our periodic treaty reviews, communications with special procedures mandate holders, including hosting a visit by the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to Clean, Healthy, and Sustainable Environment last year, and making regular substantive contributions to special procedures reports since our last review. We also place especially great importance on regularly engaging Singaporeans, other residents, and civil society to ensure we are on the right track. Ahead of our UPR, we conducted additional rounds of such consultations, which our Inter-Ministry Committee on Human Rights closely considered in preparation for our national report. We approach our fourth UPR today in a similar spirit of openness to constructive dialogue and a desire to do better in line with the aspirations of Singaporeans. Mr. President, may I introduce our head of delegation, Ms. Rahayu Mazam. Ms. Rahayu is currently the Minister of State for Health, as well as Digital Development and Information. She previously served at the Ministry of Law. In Singapore, human rights is the responsibility of the whole of government. Our choice of Minister Rahayu to lead our UPR is testament to this holistic approach. Ms. Rahayu is an accomplished lawyer by profession and a community leader by conviction. She's a long-time champion of the special needs community, youth development, and women empowerment. It is now my pleasure to invite the Minister to outline Singapore's approach to human rights and the progress made since our last review. Minister.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, a very good afternoon to all of you. My delegation and I are honored to address you today for Singapore's fourth UPR. Singapore marked 60 years of independence last year. As a young and small nation, born of diversity, milestones such as this not only give us time to reflect on how far we have come, but more importantly, where we are going next. Our efforts in promoting and protecting human rights is an ongoing journey as we build our nation and make lives better for our people. We therefore regard today's review as an important opportunity to engage constructively with the international community, to listen and to learn so that we may better safeguard the dignity of all persons and build inclusive societies where all have the opportunities to fulfill their potential. Allow me to begin by sharing Singapore's story and approach to advancing human rights. Singapore has come a long way since independence in 1965. We were once described as an improbable nation, a small island with an ethnically diverse society, high unemployment, overpopulation, a lack of natural resources, and an economy that depended entirely on trade with other countries. We quickly realized that our survival and success depend heavily on our people. We had to build our future on human talent, a strong economy, and a united society. Given our limited resources and the risk of divisions in our society, we have worked hard to build a country where our people can thrive and achieve their aspirations. This requires order and stability, adherence to the rule of law, and a commitment to keep improving and adapting to new challenges. These realities shape our two-pronged approach to human rights. First, we recognize that there is no one single approach to the realization of human rights. Each country has to approach it in ways that take into account its own national context and social realities. Across the world, we have seen how global pressures, including geopolitical tensions, economic uncertainty, and the impact of technology can strain social unity. Therefore, even as we create space for diverse views and opinions to be expressed in Singapore, we emphasize the importance of forging a shared national identity and strengthening social empathy. Second, we seek to protect human rights in a pragmatic, outcomes-focused manner. We judge progress by lives improved, and our outcomes have been encouraging. Life expectancy has increased from about 64 years at independence to 84 years today, reflecting strong progress in our promotion of the right to health. Access to education has improved substantially, with our primary and secondary schools reaching near universal cohorts and with strong learning outcomes. Singapore continues to be recognized as one of the least corrupt countries in the world, ranking third in Transparency International's 2025 index, a reflection of our strong public governance. At the same time, we know that there is always more to do. We continually engage our people to understand gaps and how we can do better. It is my government's strong belief that meaningful participation and dialogue are essential to shaping policies that uphold the rights and aspirations of all members of our society. For example, in 2022, we embarked on an 18-month nationwide consultation to review and refresh our social compact. Over 200,000 Singaporeans joined this conversation and shared their views on the future they wish to build together. Singaporeans expressed a clear desire to be empowered to pursue diverse aspirations and their own definitions of success, to have the assurance of being cared for and protected at every stage of life, and to share collective responsibility for building a more inclusive and cohesive society. These continue to guide our efforts to advance and protect human rights. Mr. President, we review the feedback from our citizens and civil society organizations seriously. Since our last UPR, we have taken concrete steps to enhance protections against discrimination, expand access to justice, and strengthen safeguards for communities at risk. In line with our ongoing effort to ensure that human rights are protected in our laws, policies, and practices, Singapore signed the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Sale of Children, Child Prostitution, and Child Pornography last year. We also lifted our reservation to Article 25E of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities after strengthening our domestic non-discrimination guidelines. In 2025, our Parliament passed Singapore's first workplace anti-discrimination law, helping to ensure that no worker is unfairly disadvantaged due to who they are. We included new legal protections for platform workers, covering their unique retirement adequacy and work-related injury needs, areas where regulations are still evolving globally. Since our last UPR, we have continued to strengthen support for communities that need more protection. We expanded subsidies for workplace modifications that help women, persons with disabilities, and older persons remain in the workforce, fostering more inclusive employment practices. We also established the Public Defender's Office to improve access to criminal defense aid and strengthen the right to a fair trial. In 2022, our Parliament voted to repeal a colonial-era law criminalizing consensual sex between men. At the same time, constitutional amendments clarified Parliament's role in defining and regulating marriage. These followed years of careful public consultation and national debate. This approach reflects our continued commitment to combating discrimination, while also being committed to managing social differences and differing views with care and sensitivity. This has helped us to largely avoid the culture wars phenomenon, which can polarize societies and worsen discrimination in practice. We continue to invest heavily in education, housing, and healthcare. We have strengthened social safety nets so that no one is left behind. We expanded lifelong learning and digital skills training so that our people can adapt to a fast-changing world with confidence. We have built more neighborhood-based care systems for an aging population. and we're taking concrete steps to address climate risks. These are long-term investments in our people's dignity, resilience, and opportunity. Mr. President, in our experience, social harmony among diverse groups does not happen on its own. It must be nurtured patiently, deliberately, and together. One example, Singapore's public housing system, which houses over 80% of our population, is designed to ensure that families of different ethnic backgrounds live side by side. It is not left to chance. It is built into policy and reinforced daily through lived experience. Such everyday interactions build understanding and empathy and ultimately create a more cohesive society. We remain committed to strengthening inclusion, mutual respect, and equal belonging for all members of our society. Even as we celebrate the progress we have made, we recognize that we must continue to advance equality and inclusion, reinforce protections, and provide more opportunities for at-risk groups in our society. We must also ensure that pressing challenges like digital inclusion, an aging population, and climate change are addressed. We are a constant work in progress. We will have to be bold and creative to meet new challenges and fulfill the aspirations of our people. This UPR process reminds us that human rights advancement is a shared endeavor, strengthened not by uniformity, but by mutual learning and sincere engagement. We look forward to today's dialogue. We thank all states for taking the time to participate in our review. I now invite Ms. Cynthia Liao, Deputy Secretary at the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, to speak on Singapore's focus on preserving racial and religious harmony. Cynthia, please.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, today I will speak about Singapore's efforts and progress in building a cohesive society. Singapore is a small and densely populated city-state, shaped by people of many races, languages, and religions. We remain the most religiously diverse country in the world, according to a 2026 Pew Research Center study. For 60 years, Singapore has placed great importance on forging a cohesive nation despite our diversity. Our early struggles are well documented. We experienced racial riots a year before independence, and lives were lost. We therefore do not take social harmony for granted, as Singapore's continued progress hinges on our national unity and cohesion. Today, 93% of respondents in the 2024 Gallup World Poll said that Singapore is a good place for racial and ethnic minorities, placing Singapore first among 134 countries and territories polled. Our model for social harmony is founded on the principle of equality as enshrined in our Constitution. With this foundation, we promote mutual understanding among different racial and religious communities to foster social cohesion. This allows us to build strong social networks and relationships that bind society together. The harmony we enjoy today is a result of continuous and deliberate efforts across two areas. First, strengthening our legal framework, and second, fostering social cohesion. Under Singapore's Constitution, all persons are equal before the law and entitled to equal protection. Our laws provide strong safeguards against discrimination with clear boundaries against divisive behavior and prevent the mixing of religion and politics. We regularly enhance our laws and policies to ensure we remain relevant and responsive to our evolving social context. Last year, we introduced the Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act to strengthen protections for social cohesion, taking close reference from our existing Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act. The Act creates a new council to advise the President on certain matters concerning racial and religious harmony and introduces additional safeguards, such as community-based measures to encourage reconciliation and understanding between racial groups. Next, let me highlight our efforts to foster social cohesion. Singapore's model of multiculturalism is one where we embrace individual cultural identities and seek to weave a larger tapestry of national identity by bringing different cultures together. We actively support policy and programs which maximize our common space and encourage social mixing so that Singaporeans from all backgrounds can live together while appreciating each other's differences. This is reflected in the intentional design of our public housing, where all races, Chinese, Malays, Indians, Eurasians, and others, are represented in each block. Our public housing also features common corridors and shared spaces that encourage daily interactions. We recognize harmony is built by people. We therefore encourage community-led efforts to bring different racial and religious groups together to deepen understanding and collaboration. Our racial and religious harmony circles are community networks that build understanding, trust, and confidence across different faith, beliefs, and cultures at the grassroots level. Last July, our community partners organized our annual Racial and Religious Harmony Month, which brought together some 100,000 people to celebrate our multicultural roots. Beyond peaceful coexistence, we celebrate each other's cultures. We do this through community arts and cultural performances that bring these multicultural experiences into our neighborhoods. We also provide funding for community interfaith and cross-cultural projects, as well as the development of traditional and multicultural art forms. And to ensure our next generation of Singaporeans will carry on and build on our ethos of multiculturalism, we partner with youth to run dialogue, ground-up projects, and community events to foster social cohesion. Mr. President, Singapore has built an environment where social cohesion is a lived reality, shaped by the active hands and hearts of our people. It is not perfect and is a constant work in progress. However, we believe our efforts have been effective in ensuring racial and religious harmony and in protecting our people's social and cultural rights. I thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Mr. President, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Minister Rahayu, and I thank also through you the delegation of Singapore for the statements. We shall now begin our interactive dialogue. Before giving the floor to delegations for their quick questions and comments, I would like to remind you that the speaking time will be 50 seconds for all. I wish to reiterate that issues of a political, bilateral, and territorial nature should be kept out of our deliberations. Moreover, United Nations terminology should be used when referring to states and territories. Please be reminded that only the use of words recommend, recommendation will ensure that the relevant parts of your statements are included in the recommendation section of the working group report. Also, allow me to recall that the Human Rights Council strongly rejects any acts of intimidation or reprisal against individuals and groups who cooperate or have cooperated with the United Nations and its representatives and mechanisms in the field of human rights. We will now begin with the list of speakers, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Mr. President, Kenya warmly welcomes the Singaporean delegation. We note the comprehensive national report, which reflects the significant strides made since the third cycle, particularly in advancing inclusive development, strengthening social protection systems, and promoting workforce skills in development in an evolving digital economy. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, Kenya offers the following two recommendations for kind consideration. 1. to sustain the commendable efforts in promoting inclusive and equitable access to education and skills development. 2, to sustain efforts aimed at strengthening social protection systems and supporting vulnerable groups, particularly in the context of evolving labor markets and digital transformation. We wish the delegation of Singapore a most successful review session. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kiribati.
Mr. President, Kiribati welcomes the esteemed delegation from Singapore, a fellow CITS, and thanks the delegation for the presentation of the national report. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Kiribati offers the following recommendations to Singapore. 1, further enhance social protection systems, including support for vulnerable groups such as persons with disabilities and older persons, to ensure inclusive access to services and opportunities. 2, further enhance protection for migrant workers, particularly in relation to working conditions, access to justice, and safeguards against exploitation. 3, consider reviewing the application of the death penalty, including by establishing a moratorium on executions with a view to its eventual abolition. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Thank you, President. We welcome the head of Singapore's delegation, and we applaud the efforts deployed by the government, as highlighted by the report, with regards to the judiciary law in 2025, which prevents discrimination at the workplace. We wish to offer the following recommendations. Firstly, continue efforts to reinforce child rights, particularly through reinforcing integrated education for children with disability. Secondly, ensure the provision of affordable healthcare services, particularly for vulnerable people. We wish Singapore further success and prosperity within the framework of the UPR. And thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kyrgyz Republic warmly welcomes Her Excellency Madam Mazam and her distinguished delegation. We express our content that Singapore accepted the recommendations made by Kyrgyzstan during the third UPR cycle, demonstrating a shared commitment to advancing human rights. Building on this positive cooperation, Kyrgyzstan would like to offer the following recommendations. Sustain efforts to empower women to increase their representation in public and political life. Further strengthen measures to maintain interracial harmony and interreligious understanding. Continue improving the protection and welfare of migrant workers. We wish Singapore every success in the current UPR cycle and reaffirm our support for its endeavors to uphold and advance human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lao PDR.
Mr. President, the Lao PDR warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of Singapore to this UPR session and thanks for its comprehensive report. The Lao PDR commends Singapore for the remarkable progress made in the advancement of human rights through the implementation of the adopted recommendation in the previous cycle, particularly in building its inclusive, cohesive, and resilient society. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, my delegation proposes 2 recommendations. 1, enhance its efforts further to promote children's rights, including the promotion of inclusive education for children with disability. 2, further improve the protection and welfare of migrant workers. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the delegation for its presentation. Australia welcomes Singapore's repeal of Section 377A of the Penal Code, strengthened family violence protections under the Women's Charter, improved housing and healthcare for migrant workers, and its first binding anti-discrimination framework through the Workplace Fairness Act. Australia is concerned Singapore's executions reached their highest level in over 20 years in 2025. Australia recommends Singapore re-establish a moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty. Strengthen the protections for migrant workers by establishing a government-run recruitment system to prevent deceptive hiring and contract substitution, and amend the Workplace Fairness Act to prohibit other forms of discrimination, including on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and sex characteristics. We wish you every success.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lesotho.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kingdom of Lesotho welcomes the High Delegation of Singapore and thanks Singapore for its continued engagement with the UPR process. We commend Singapore for its continued efforts in advancing the protection of women's rights. Lesotho, however, recommends Singapore to 1. Intensify efforts to empower women and expand their participation in public and political life. 2. Continue to adopt and implement legislation and policies to protect all persons against discrimination, including racial minorities, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups. 3. Strengthen the protection of migrant workers, particularly migrant domestic workers, by ensuring fair labor conditions, access to justice, and protection from exploitation and abuse. Lesotho wishes Singapore a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Libya.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of Singapore, and we thank them for their presentation and the efforts made to ensure the rights of people, particularly social and cultural rights, and gains with regards to education, health, and social development. We table the following recommendations. Firstly, continue efforts to combat human trafficking and ensuring social and legal protection for survivors. Secondly, protect elder persons and provide necessary services to them in a manner that is affordable. 3, continue empowering women in order to ensure her participation in public life. In closing, we wish the delegation a successful UPR. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lithuania welcomes the delegation of Singapore. We acknowledge Singapore's leadership in advancing digital inclusion through community partnerships, ensuring everyone's access to digital services. We commend steps taken since the last UPR cycle in strengthening the resilience of society to respond to the growing hybrid challenges, including disinformation and information manipulation. Lithuania would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Strengthen school-based mental health support services for young people. 2. Sign and ratify the core international human rights treaties, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 3. Establish a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its complete abolition. We wish Singapore all success in the current UPR. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Président. Vice President, Luxembourg would like to welcome the delegation of Singapore. We thank the delegation for the presentation of the national report. My delegation commends the efforts made by Singapore to promote human rights. Luxembourg would like to make the following recommendations to Singapore. Firstly, to introduce a moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty. Secondly, to ratify the United Nations Fundamental Instruments on Human Rights, to which Singapore is not yet a party. And thirdly, to undertake assessments and multi-stakeholder consultations on laws relating to freedom of expression and freedom of association with a view to strengthening safeguards linked to those rights. We wish Singapore every success in this review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malawi.
Mr. President, Malawi warmly welcomes Singapore to this review and thanks the esteemed delegation for the presentation. Malawi commends Singapore for the progress made in the promotion and protection of human rights since the last review. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Malawi makes the following recommendation to Singapore. 1. Continue efforts to empower women to increase their representation in public and political life. 2. Enhance awareness and prevention programs against violence against children and cyberbullying of children. And 3. Continue cooperation with OHCHR and other UN human rights mechanisms. We wish Singapore all the best at this review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, Malaysia warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore to Geneva and thanks Her Excellency Rahayu Mazam for the presentation of the national report. Among others, Malaysia commends Singapore on improving the rights of women, children, and older persons through key legislations and initiatives. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Malaysia recommends the following. 1. Continue efforts to uphold the right to life, including by ensuring that appropriate discretion and safeguards are applied in the most serious of crimes involving persons with intellectual disabilities. 2. Enhance measures to allow individuals to manifest their religion or beliefs without undue restrictions, including in the public sector. And 3. Continue efforts towards the protection of children against harmful online content. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
Mr. President, the Maldives welcomes the high-level delegation from Singapore to this fourth cycle review. The Maldives commends Singapore for its commitment to uplifting its people and fostering a cohesive and stable society where all can thrive. In a constructive spirit, the Maldives makes the following recommendations. 1. Strengthen measures to protect children from harmful online content, including focusing on online safety of children. 2. Strengthen inclusive urban planning to further support older persons and persons with disabilities. 3. Ensure continued support for children from low-income families. We wish Singapore, a fellow SIDS, a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. Malta welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks them for the national report. We acknowledge the high level of development enjoyed by Singapore and its commitment to fulfilling Agenda 2030. We'd like to make the following recommendations. 1. Ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. 2. Implement a moratorium on the death penalty as a first step towards its abolition in all instances. 3. Amend legislation to allow citizens to exercise their right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. 4. Introduce legislation to ban so-called gay conversion practices. We wish Singapore a successful review.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Marshall Islands.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Marshall Islands welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks them for the presentation of the report. We are encouraged by continued efforts to strengthen women's rights in Singapore, including through its enactment of the Workplace Fairness Act 2025. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend the following. 1. Promote the meaningful participation of women in environmental and climate change decision-making. 2. Is consider establishing a de jure moratorium on the application of the death penalty. And number 3, consider ratifying core human rights instruments, including the ICCPR, the ISIS-CAR, and the UNCAP. We wish the delegation every success during the fourth UPR cycle. Komodada, and I thank you.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritania.
Thank you, President. We wish to welcome the delegation of Singapore and applaud their participation in the UPR process. We acknowledge the efforts deployed by Singapore to establish a prosperous society, efforts that are reflected in its gains in housing, healthcare, social cohesion, and education. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, we offer the following recommendations. Reinforce access to healthcare services to migrant workers by supporting socio-psychological support and social protection. Secondly, prevention against harmful electronic content, particularly for older persons and children, while ensuring access to non-basic digital services. Lastly, we wish the delegation a successful UPR. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritius.
Thank you, Chair. Mauritius warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore. We commend Singapore for its efforts to building an inclusive society and the support provided to vulnerable groups through targeted policies and community measures. We welcome Singapore's efforts to combat climate change and sea level rise and its role played in the BBNJ agreement and in ensuring a human rights-based approach to ocean conservation. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that Singapore involves persons with disabilities in relevant policymaking processes and enhances workplace protections relating to maternity, caregiving responsibilities, and flexible work arrangement, with a view to increasing the participation of women in the workforce. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Thank you. We would like to thank Singapore for its report, and we welcome the decriminalization of sexual relations between men. In a constructive and respectful way, Mexico recommends, firstly, to impose a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its abolition and to consider commuting all existing death penalties that have been handed down. Secondly, to prevent and eradicate female genital mutilation through its criminalization, the regulation of its medicalization, awareness-raising campaigns, and mechanisms for connecting disaggregated data. Thirdly, to align the definition of disability in legislation in order to include all types of disabilities, including mental and psychosocial disabilities, in accordance with the Convention's social model. I thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mongolia.
We welcome Singapore's sustained commitment to advancing socioeconomic development and maintaining social cohesion. We further note efforts to address discrimination in employment and provide avenues for redress, as well as measures to strengthen protections for vulnerable groups. In a spirit of constructive engagement, we would like to offer the following recommendations. 1, to continue strengthening its human rights framework, including by further fostering an enabling environment for civic participation. And 2, to further intensify efforts to prevent and respond to gender-based violence, including by strengthening legal safeguards and support services. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Mr. President, Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of Singapore. We welcome Singapore's vision of an inclusive society where everyone can realize their potential. We commend reforms strengthening protection for women, migrants, and persons with disabilities, including measures addressing sexual and family violence, workplace fairness, and hate speech. Montenegro recommends that Singapore, 1, establish an independent human rights institution with a broad mandate to promote and protect human rights in accordance with the Paris Principles, and 2, adopt comprehensive legislation criminalizing all forms of gender-based violence against women, including domestic and online violence, while ensuring adequate protection for disadvantaged and marginalized groups of women. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
Thank you, Mr. President. The delegation wishes to thank the delegation of Singapore for the presentation of their national report. Morocco welcomes the efforts of the government of Singapore to protect and promote human rights, including the recent publishing of a white paper on the empowerment of women, as well as the adoption of anti-discrimination legislation. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, my delegation wishes to make the following 3 recommendations. 1, continue ongoing efforts to provide adequate financial support to lower-income families with a view to ensure affordability of education. 2, accelerate efforts to increase women's representation in leadership positions. And 3, consider establishing a national mechanism for implementation, reporting, and follow-up on the basis of the Marrakesh Guidance Framework. We wish full success to the delegation of Singapore in this review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique welcomes delegates from Singapore and thanks them for the presentation of the national reports to the 4th cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. Mozambique commends Singapore for its efforts to ensure that every child has access to affordable and quality education to give each child a strong start in life. In a spirit of a constructive engagement, Mozambique presents the following recommendation. 1, continue efforts to empower women to increase their representation in public and political life. And 2, continue to enhance protection for children from harmful online content. Mozambique with Singapore have success in this review process. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Namibia extend a warm welcome to the esteemed delegation of Singapore and thanks them for their comprehensive report. We commend Singapore for making notable strides in the realm of gender equality, placing it at number 8 globally and the number 1 in Asia Pacific for gender equality. In a constructive spirit, Namibia offers the following recommendation. 1, ratify the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Ratify the International Convention on the Civil and the Political Rights, and ratify the Convention Against Torture and the other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. We wish the esteemed delegation of Singapore a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal.
Mr. President, Nepal warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore to the 4th cycle of UPR and thanks them for the presentation of national report. We appreciate Singapore's commitment to advancing human rights and its constructive engagement with the human rights mechanisms. We take positive note of the efforts made by Singapore in implementing the recommendation of previous cycle and the progress achieved. In a constructive spirit, Nepal recommends Singapore for the following. 1, strengthen measures to promote
protecting our young from harm. We also invest heavily in nurturing our young so that they can achieve their full potential. Annual state spending in early education has doubled from Singapore $1 billion in 2018 to over $2 billion today. This is about US 1.5 and initiatives to support women. While men and women now have comparable educational outcomes and more women have entered the workforce and taken on leadership positions, barriers remain. Many women continue to shoulder more responsibility in the home, in the community, and in society. In 2020, we embarked on an ambitious year-long consultation exercise to advance women's development. This culminated in a 2022 white paper on Singapore women's development. One key action plan is to address workplace discrimination. Last year, Parliament passed the landmark Workplace Fairness Act to strengthen protections against workplace discrimination related to characteristics such as sex, marital status, pregnancy, caregiving responsibilities, race, religion, and disability. Employers are required to have a process to handle any allegations or complaints about discrimination or harassment faced at the workplace. Employees who have raised such allegations are also protected from retaliation under the Act. For instance, their employers must not dismiss them, deduct their salary, or harass them simply because they have come forward. In this way, the Act provides legislative safeguards for employees, including for women, persons with disabilities, and persons of minority races. We amended the Women's Charter in 2023 to better protect victims, survivors of domestic violence, and hold perpetrators accountable. For instance, we expanded the definition of family violence to include emotional and psychological abuse. We also appointed a 24-hour emergency response team with powers to issue emergency orders to stop perpetrators from committing further violence at the scene of high-risk cases. Third, I will speak about our recent efforts to support families. We stand together with Singaporeans as they start and raise their families. The support begins from birth, where the government provides a sizable cash gift when a child is born. As the child grows, we provide government-paid parental leave, primary health care, and priority housing schemes for families with children.
Recognizing that both men and women wish to pursue their careers while raising children, Singapore provides affordable, quality, and accessible childcare services. To encourage men to take on greater caregiving roles, we doubled the government-paid paternity leave to 4 weeks last year and introduced a shared parental leave scheme. Further, to help parents juggle their work and caregiving responsibilities, we issued tripartite guidelines in 2024 to shape norms around flexible working arrangements. Fourth, Singapore becomes a super-aged society this year. It is crucial, therefore, for us to promote and protect the rights of older persons. We thank Slovenia for the advanced question. In this regard, we have a law to protect vulnerable adults who cannot protect themselves from abuse, neglect, or self-neglect. This will include older persons. The law empowers persons authorized by the state to remove vulnerable adults from the place they are residing and commit them to a place of care and protection or the care of a fit person if it is in their best interests. Our efforts go beyond simply stopping abuse. We actively promote the well-being of older persons through their participation in society. For instance, the government has set up over 200 active aging centers within easy access of older persons where they can participate in physical activities and maintain social networks. Fifth, I will speak now about our efforts to protect LGBT persons. We note the concerns raised by member states on this topic. We firmly believe that LGBT persons are equal members of our society. In 2022, our parliament voted to repeal a colonial-era law which criminalized consensual sex between men. While the law had not been enforced in practice for a long time, this repeal formalized the government's policy that such acts should not be criminalized. At the same time, Parliament recognized that the legal definition of marriage as between a man and a woman is a socio-political issue that is for Parliament, not the courts, to decide. The Constitution was accordingly amended to ensure that the definition of marriage and laws and policies based on that definition can only be decided on by the Singapore Parliament. Like every Singaporean, LGBT persons in Singapore have access to opportunities, education, employment, healthcare, social services, and importantly, protections from harassment and violence. Last but certainly not the least, we have made significant strides to build a caring and inclusive society where persons with disabilities can pursue their aspirations, achieve their potential, and participate as integral members of society. We have successfully implemented our master plans on disability. They were refreshed in 2022 together with persons with disabilities. We achieved significant progress, such as increasing employment rate of persons with disabilities from 28% in 2018 to 34% in 2024. We aim to increase this even further to 40% by 2030. Mr. President, Singapore remains committed to protecting vulnerable groups in our society. We will continue to strengthen our social safety nets so that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, I'm Angela Tan, Director at the Ministry of Digital Development and Information. Singapore believes that every person is entitled to live with dignity, safety, and a fair chance to thrive in the digital future. This includes those whose voices are often marginalized: women, children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. Singapore affirms our commitment to uphold and protect the rights of these groups, both offline and online. We ensure that no one gets left behind. In our increasingly digital world, this commitment extends to ensuring that vulnerable groups are equally included. We provide all our people with access to digital opportunities while protecting them from online harms. Since our third UPR, Singapore has made progress by updating our laws and policies to keep pace with rapid technological change. Today, I will speak about how we're working to ensure that all our citizens can continue to live, work, and play in the digital age while remaining safe from online harms. Let me begin with our efforts in advancing digital literacy and inclusion. Singapore is a highly connected digital society. 99% of our households have internet access, and 96% of Singaporeans own smartphones. Digital payments are now the default in Singapore. Most government transactions are completed online. Against these developments, certain groups, such as older persons and persons with disabilities, may face greater challenges navigating digital spaces. That is why we work hard to ensure that our digital transformation is inclusive, safe, and equitable. We do this in two ways. First, we believe all citizens should have opportunities to acquire digital skills. We launched the Digital Skills for Life framework in 2024 to equip our people with the skills to carry out daily tasks, from booking medical appointments to using mobile banking, while staying safe online. Singaporeans can also learn digital skills in person with our digital ambassadors at communal spaces like our public libraries. These ambassadors provide tailored and multilingual support to better connect with older persons. Under this effort, we've supported over 400,000 people since 2020. Second, access to government services must remain universal, regardless of the digital skill or circumstances of its users. Even as we digitalize government services, we have designed them to be accessible and inclusive. For instance, we retain physical touchpoints like service counters to support citizens who may be less confident navigating online services. Digital innovation presents tremendous opportunities to uplift societies. In Singapore, telehealth apps are expanding access to healthcare by bringing it into patients' homes and workplaces. Assistive technologies are enabling persons with disabilities to independently access essential services like banking and transport. We will continue to work closely with our partners to reach out to citizens of all ages and backgrounds so that digital opportunities remain open to all. Next, let me highlight our efforts to enhance online safety, which several member states had raised. While online spaces create new opportunities for connection and expression, they have also facilitated the rapid spread of harmful content. This happens often with anonymity and at a scale we've not seen before. A recent government survey found that, in the past year alone, more than 4 in 5 Singapore residents encountered harmful online content. Some of the most common types of content include sexual or violent content, cyberbullying, or content causing racial or religious tension. This underscores the importance of appropriate safeguards against online harms. Since our last UPR, we've strengthened our laws to better protect our people, especially our children, from harmful online content. Let me highlight 2 key developments. First, in 2022, we amended the Broadcasting Act to foster a safer online environment. The government can now act swiftly against egregious content, such as social media pages used to solicit and distribute child sexual exploitation material. We've also introduced guidelines for designated social media services and app stores. These guidelines require them to implement measures to minimize users' exposures to harmful content, especially children. These safeguards include content moderation processes, as well as measures to ensure that young users do not access age-inappropriate content. Second, our Parliament passed a new Online Safety, Relief and Accountability Act last year. This was in response to feedback from victims of online harms who suffered from online harassment or intimate image abuse. Survivors of online harms have also reported feeling helpless and a loss of agency. A new Online Safety Commission can issue directions and orders to stop or remedy the harm in response to victims' reports. The law also introduces additional avenues of recourse, so victims can hold their perpetrators accountable. For example, victims can commence legal proceedings against those who caused or failed to act against online harms. Together, these measures help to ensure a safer digital environment for our people, particularly vulnerable groups like our women and children. We are also aware of how polarization and misinformation can fracture societies and erode public trust. Around the world, we've seen how falsehoods and divisive narratives, when amplified online, can sow distrust and sometimes lead to violence. As a small, digitally connected, multiracial, and multi-religious society, Singapore is particularly vulnerable to such forces. Given Singapore's unique context, it is crucial that we protect the delicate trust that binds our communities and sustain confidence in our public institutions. In Singapore, the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, or POFMA, is our targeted tool to fight online misinformation. Let me make some clarifications on POFMA. A POFMA correction direction does not require the false content to be removed. It only requires the government's clarification to be carried alongside it. This allows readers to compare both accounts and make up their own minds. The recipient of a correction direction is also free to continue expressing his or her opinions and to challenge the direction in the courts if they wish to do so. POFMA only applies to false statements of fact that affect public interest. It does not apply to opinions. It cannot be used just because the government disagrees with a statement. Alongside POFMA, we also conduct public education and media literacy programs to ensure that our people can confidently discern fact from falsehoods. Despite the steps we've taken, we know that online safety will always be a work in progress. Technology continues to evolve, and so must our responses. We will keep engaging our people, learning from the experiences of others, and updating our laws and policies to tackle emerging challenges. Singapore remains strongly committed to harnessing technology for good, while ensuring that fundamental liberties are upheld. We will continue to build a safer and more inclusive digital future for all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and distinguished delegates. I'm Ranjit Singh, Divisional Director at the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment of Singapore. Mr. President, climate change is the existential challenge of our time. It impacts nearly all human rights, including the right to life and the enjoyment of the highest attainable standards for physical and mental health. It has and will continue to cause serious harm to lives, livelihoods, and the environment, and no nation is spared. As a small, dense, and low-lying island city, Singapore is especially vulnerable. By the end of this century, the sea level around Singapore could rise by 5 meters during high tides and storm surges, and this could potentially inundate up to 30% of our land if we do nothing. And Singapore's mean temperature, which is currently at 30 degrees Celsius, could rise by another 5 degrees. So tackling climate change is a national priority. While Singapore has no natural resources and limited opportunities for renewable energy, we are fully committed to addressing climate change. We are actively protecting the human rights of our people and shielding them from the effects of climate change, and I will highlight 3 ways that we are doing so. First, we are promoting environmentally responsible practices across all segments of society. Despite accounting for just 0.1% of global emissions, Singapore was the first in Southeast Asia to implement an economy-wide carbon price. We offer grants and subsidies to help businesses decarbonize. Companies can access co-funding of up to 70% of energy efficiency project costs, and there is enhanced support for manufacturing facilities and data centers to reduce their emissions. These are just some measures to accelerate Singapore's transition to a low-carbon economy. To cushion the impact of the carbon price, lower and middle-income households get rebates to offset the increases of their utilities bills. Most households also receive vouchers that make it cheaper to switch to more energy and water efficient appliances. And to seize green economy opportunities, we are actively helping workers to upgrade their skills and supporting employers in job redesign. Second, Singapore seeks to ensure everyone is safe from the impacts of climate change regardless of their circumstances. We've developed strategies to ensure vulnerable groups have access to relief from extreme heat, and we have implemented measures including mandatory regulations and the deployment of AI and digital technologies to ensure our outdoor workers remain safe. And as climate change threatens food security, we are strengthening food resilience through local production, import diversification, stockpiling, and global partnerships. This is to ensure a reliable access to food and that no one goes hungry. Singapore is also investing in research and development. We have set aside $31 million for research in heat impact and community heat resilience. And we are managing flood risk by investing in long-term planning, research, and innovation, including by financing the construction of drainage networks and coastal protection infrastructure. These will be some of the elements in our first National Adaptation Plan, which will be released next year. Finally, Singapore's efforts extend beyond our shores because climate change knows no boundaries. International cooperation is key to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and everyone must do their part. Singapore is faithfully implementing our obligations under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. We were among the few countries to have submitted our 2035 nationally determined contributions on time. We are supporting global climate action, including the development of carbon markets and green transport corridors, as well as strengthening regional green power grids. We contribute to international research by co-chairing the IPCC Working Group on Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerabilities, and we have hosted the Technical Support Unit since February 2024 to support this work. Mr. President, through these efforts, Singapore is working to protect the human rights of our people for today and for generations to come. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by thanking fellow 6 member states for their strong participation and contributions to our UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ranjit. Mr. President, I now hand the floor to you.
Thank you. We will now continue with our interactive dialogue, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Serbia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Serbia commends Singapore's dedication to the UPR process, engagement with the human rights mechanism between 2 cycles. We welcome the measures taken in the areas of education, housing, and healthcare. Furthermore, we know the efforts made to ensure the quality and learning opportunities in education, and Serbia would like to provide the following recommendations. First, continue to review the ratification of the human rights conventions in which Singapore is not yet a party. Second, strengthen support for older women health, economic and psychological well-being to ensure affordable care service, especially for those without family support. We will wish Singapore a very successful review, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Seychelles.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seychelles welcomes the distinguished delegation of Singapore and thanks it for its comprehensive presentation. Seychelles commends Singapore's efforts to advance the status of women, including through the 2022 White Paper, which outlines 25 collective action plans aimed at further empowerment and upliftment. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Seychelles offers the following recommendations to Singapore. 1. Strengthen efforts to ensure the full inclusion and meaningful participation of persons with disabilities. 2. Continue to enhance measures to prevent and respond effectively to gender-based violence. 3. Further promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. And Seychelles wishes Singapore a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, we extend a warm welcome to the distinguished delegation of Singapore. We commend Singapore for its substantial progress in advancing gender equality. We acknowledge Singapore's strong commitment to the UPR process and its financial support to the live streaming of this 52nd UPR session. We acknowledge Singapore's significant support efforts to maintain near universal enrollment at the primary and secondary levels. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we offer the following recommendations. 1, continue to promote inclusive education. And 2, strengthen support to children from low-income families. We extend a successful review to our friendly Republic of Singapore.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia thanks the delegation of Singapore for the national report. We commend Singapore for its effort to advance human rights, particularly through updating laws to better protect against violence and exploitation and to build institutional mechanisms for gender equality. We would like to repeat respectfully our recommendations to Singapore to ratify the core international human rights treaties, namely the 2 major covenants and the Convention Against Torture, and to establish a moratorium on the use of the death penalty. We remain concerned about the limitations of the rights of freedom of expression and opinion, peaceful assembly and association. We wish Singapore a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Federal Republic of Somalia warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Republic of Singapore. Somalia commends Singapore for its commitment to human rights, social development, inclusive economic growth. We welcome the implementation of programs aimed at the building a future-proof workforce through the successful to skills future Singapore, as well as to strengthen early childhood education. Somalia recommends first, continue strengthening inclusive social protection systems, particularly for the vulnerable families and older persons. Second, further enhancing digital literacy and access programs to ensure equal opportunities for all in the digital economy. Somalia wishes Singapore success in its UBR review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, South African delegation thanks the delegation of Singapore for the presentation of its report. We commend Singapore's continued efforts to build an inclusive and resilient society, including the adoption of the 2025 Workplace Fairness Act and strengthened protections against harassment and online harms. We also note measures to support women, persons with disabilities, and older persons. South Africa encourages Singapore to continue advancing human rights for all and makes the following recommendations. 1, continue efforts to strengthen anti-discrimination protections, including for vulnerable and marginalized groups. 2, amend the 2009 Public Order Act in order to guarantee fully the right to freedom of peaceful assembly in line with international human rights law. 3, consider broadening the definition of trafficking to align with the ILO indicators of forced labor and provide stronger victim-centered protection for cases of forced labor. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Sudan.
Mr. President, South Sudan welcomed the distinguished delegation of Singapore to the 4th UPR cycle. We commend Singapore for its full commitment to promote and protect the human rights of its people and for being ranked first in the world for public safety. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, South Sudan recommend 1, consider ratifying the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. 2, continue effort to empower women to increase their representation in public and political life. 3, continue effort to promote children's rights, including through the promotion of inclusive education for children with disabilities. We wish the friendly Republic of Singapore a successful UPR review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you, President. And thank you, Your Excellency. We welcome the delegation of Singapore and thank them for their participation in this exercise. We very much welcome the repeal of Article 377A of the Criminal Code, which previously criminalized same-sex consensual relationships between adult men. This is a major step forward in the protection of the rights of LGBTIQ+ persons. We recommend 1, that Singapore adopt a legal moratorium on executions as a precursor towards the complete abolition of the death penalty, and in interim ensure that this punishment is not applied to any drug-related crimes, thus complying with the international standard of the most serious crimes. 2, guarantee genuine equality and non-discrimination for the LGBTIQ+ collective, revising recent constitutional reforms that limit the definition of marriage and ensuring that public policies do not exclude diverse forms of family. 3, strengthen the protection of the rights of migrant workers, improving their living conditions and housing standards, and guaranteeing that labour law provides them the right to switch employer and effective protection from wage abuse, as well as improving their effective access to justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, Sri Lanka extends a warm welcome to the delegation of Singapore and appreciates the comprehensive presentation made to this Council. We appreciate the action taken by Singapore to sign the optional protocol to the CRC on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography in the last year. We further welcome the progress achieved by Singapore in the spheres of workplace equality and women's safety through the enactment of prospective legislation and efficient law enforcement. In a constructive spirit, Sri Lanka recommends that Singapore enhance measures to advance the right to education with the emphasis on children from low-income families and children with disabilities, continue developing policies to advance the rights of elderly persons, take further measures to protect and promote the rights and well-being and safety of migrants, strengthen inclusive urban planning, including public spaces, housing, and transport systems to support older persons and persons with disabilities. We wish Singapore success in its UPR engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan.
Thank you, President. We extend a very warm welcome to the Singaporean delegation. We congratulate them upon the progress that has been made in legal and institutional reforms, particularly the steps they have taken to uphold the rights of persons with disabilities, the elderly, migrant workers, and to ensure the participation of women in political life and ensure women's access to key and decision-making posts. I would also add to all of that Singapore's response to climate change and the adoption of a program to improve healthcare and headway that has been achieved vis-a-vis their development index, and to ensure that they properly uphold and foster diversity. Our first recommendation, that they continue to implement policies and programs to protect the elderly, particularly in the field of healthcare, as well as in work and decent housing. Our second recommendation, that they continue to implement policies for the protection of the environment in order to ensure that they can withstand the impact of climate change. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sweden acknowledges Singapore's continued efforts to end all forms of discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity, including through the repeal of Section 377A. However, the continued and increased use of death penalty remains deeply concerning. Sweden therefore wishes to make the following recommendations. 1. Establish an immediate moratorium on executions with a view to the full abolition of the death penalty. 2. Amend or repeal overly restrictive legislation, including the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, to ensure the full enjoyment of the rights to freedom of expression, access to information, and media freedom. And 3. Strengthen equal rights for same-sex partnerships, including by reviewing constitutional amendments that prevent legal challenges to the definition of marriage. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président. President, Switzerland welcomes the delegation of Singapore, and we make the following recommendations to the delegation. 1, that Singapore review its legislation on the death penalty by deleting from the law any obligatory imposition of the death penalty in order to guarantee the respect for the underogable right to life, as well as the guarantees of the right to due process. This in line with international human rights standards and in line with UN safeguards on the death penalty. 2, ensure that legislation on racial harmony is in line with international human rights standards by guaranteeing that any restriction on the right to freedom of expression, as protected by Article 19 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, be provided for strictly in law and be strictly necessary and proportionate without unduly restricting lawful freedom of expression. 3, study the potential of acceding to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the optional protocols to said covenant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of Singapore and express our appreciation for the presentation of the national report, which highlights the importance attached by Singapore to living up to its commitment in the field of human rights, as well as its constructive engagement with the human rights instruments. Rights of migrant workers and improving their living conditions. Secondly, continue building on gains achieved in the field of healthcare and reinforcing its affordability to all, particularly to low-income segments of society. We wish the delegation a successful UPR. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tajikistan.
Of public safety, law and order, ensuring gender equality and racial harmony, decent conditions for migrant workers. We, in a constructive spirit, recommend to Singapore to 1. We wish the delegation of Singapore an impactful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thailand commends Singapore's efforts in strengthening social protection and inclusivity to support low-income households, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. We welcome amendment to the Penal Code decriminalizing same-sex relations and efforts to address online harms while preserving social harmony. Thailand recommends that Singapore, 1, promote and protect human rights of older persons, support healthy and active aging. 2, enhance protection of migrant workers, improve living conditions, access to services, and effective grievance mechanisms. 3, advance gender equality, women empowerment, legal protection, and support system to address all forms of discrimination and violence against women. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste.
Mr. President, Timor-Leste warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore and congratulates it on the presentation of its national report under the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. We know it with appreciation Singapore continues efforts to promote and protect human rights at the national level. In the spirit of a constructive dialogue, Timor-Leste recommends to Singapore to 1, continue strengthening efforts to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. 2, continue
for their report on the human rights situation in their country. We welcome Singapore's unwavering commitment to the protection and promotion of human rights and congratulate Singapore on efforts undertaken along these lines, particularly in the fields of education, healthcare, social welfare, and the fight against discrimination. All that said, in a constructive spirit, Togo recommends the following to Singapore: enact all necessary provisions in order to pave the way for the ratification of landmark human rights instruments that the country has not yet ratified, such as those covering civil and political rights, the protection of the rights of all migrant workers and the members of their families, the protection of all persons from enforced disappearance, the fight against torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Finally, the Togolese delegation wishes Singapore every success in the implementations of the recommendations arising from this current review cycle. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Shukran.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of Singapore and thank it for the report. In 2022, we wish to offer the following recommendations. Firstly, continue efforts to reinforce the right to education, particularly for children from low-income families and improving their living conditions. Secondly, protect children online. Third, continue efforts to improve care services provided to older persons. In closing, we wish the delegation a successful UPR. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. We warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of Singapore. Singapore's globally known strive for racial and religious harmony within its borders and for social equality that benefits all citizens is commendable. Singapore has demonstrably taken many steps over the past years, and especially since its third UPR in 2021 to enhance its standings in human rights. We would like to recognize those to continue to enhance protection of children from harmful online content and to strengthen support to children from low-income families. We wish Singapore all success during its fourth cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkmenistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Turkmenistan welcomes the distinguished delegation of Singapore and expresses gratitude for the comprehensive presentation of its national report. While positively noting the progress achieved in the judicial system and the protection of human rights, Turkmenistan would like to submit the following recommendations. Pursue efforts to strengthen the legal framework and promote the rights of women and girls, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons. Continue to enhance social policies as a basis for the realization of human rights, in particular in the areas of education, health, housing, and social protection. In conclusion, Turkmenistan wishes the government of Singapore a successful UPR review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda.
Mr. President, we congratulate the delegation of Singapore for the presentation of their report, and in the spirit of constructive dialogue, would like to make two recommendations. One, continue to support international cooperation to inform global climate adaptation, including development support to developing states, especially those from Africa. Two, continue to put in place policies that prioritize the enjoyment and realization of the right to development for all. We wish our brothers and sisters of Singapore a very successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Mr. President, Ukraine welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. We highly commend the country's commitment to human rights and recent legislative developments, including the Workplace Fairness Act, as well as efforts to strengthen social protection and support vulnerable groups. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we would like to offer the following recommendations. To adopt legislation to ensure that all forms of gender-based violence against women, including domestic violence and online violence, were specifically criminalized. to establish an independent national human rights institution in full compliance with the Paris principles, to ensure that members of minority groups have adequate access to quality healthcare services. We wish Singapore a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of Singapore and thank it for its comprehensive report. We applaud the progress achieved in various fields, particularly in the field of education and healthcare. We recognize efforts aiming to empower women together with policies to counter challenges relating to climate change. We recommend the following. Firstly, continue ensuring access to high quality education that is inclusive for all. Secondly, empower women in economy and in leadership positions while developing policies and legislations to protect women against all kinds of violence. In closing, we support Singapore's efforts and wishing it further prosperity and success. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks them for their report. We welcome the government's policies in the fields of economic development, healthcare, education, social security, and steps towards improving working conditions of migrant workers. However, we are concerned about the use of the death penalty and corporal punishment and restrictions on freedom of opinion, expression, and assembly. Austria therefore offers the following recommendations. 1. Establish a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its abolition and, as a first step, consider repealing the death penalty for drug offenses which do not meet the threshold of the most serious crimes. 2. Ratify the CAT and abolish the use of corporal punishment like caning. 3. Ratify the ICCPR, ICESCR, and accede to the Rome Statute of the ICC. 4. Take further measures to improve the legal status and working conditions of migrant workers. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Republic of Tanzania.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Republic of Tanzania warmly welcomes the Republic of Singapore to this 52nd review session. We commend Singapore's pragmatic approach to the promotion and the protection of human rights while balancing individual rights with the interests of society. We also applaud measures taken to strengthen personal data protection and encourage continued efforts to adapt frameworks to emerging technologies and global development. Tanzania further congratulates Singapore for the supporting children and families through strong educational and social support system. Tanzania wishes the Republic of Singapore a successful review session. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. Uruguay welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks them for the presentation of their report. In a constructive spirit, we make the following recommendations. 1. Spare no effort in the drive towards adopting legislation that would guarantee that all forms of gender-based violence against women, including domestic violence and online violence, are duly criminalized, taking into account the specific protection needs of groups of women in particularly vulnerable situations. 2. Ratify the CAT and abolish the use of corporal punishment, including by prohibiting via law corporal punishment in educational establishments. 3. Establish an official moratorium on executions as a step towards the outright abolition of the death penalty. Uruguay wishes Singapore every success in this 4th UPR cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Chair. Uzbekistan welcomes the delegation of Singapore and its national report. We commend Singapore for its continued commitment in promoting inclusive development and improving the well-being of its population. Uzbekistan notes with appreciation the adoption of the Workplace Fairness Act 2025, as well as efforts to strengthen social protection and reduce Second, to further enhance protection of migrant workers and ensure their full access to the rights and services. Uzbekistan wishes the delegation of Singapore every success in its review. Thank you for attention.
The front line of climate change, to recalls the adverse impact of climate change and undermine the full employment of human rights. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, to respectfully offers the following recommendations. 1, continue to enhance its policies that protects vulnerable groups against the adverse impacts of climate change. 2, commit to reaching net zero emissions as soon as possible and no later than 2050. 3, enhance its policies on climate change adaptation, including by developing an national adaptation plan in consultation with relevant stakeholders. FANADU stands ready to collaborate with Singapore in advancing ambitious, measurable, and rights-based climate action. We wish the delegation every success in this review. I thank you.
Okay, thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
A of the Criminal Code, the equity law in the workplace, and steps that have been taken to improve protections for migrant workers. And in a constructive spirit, we make the following recommendations. 1, adopt a comprehensive law that would prohibit all forms of discrimination on the grounds of race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. 2, abolish the death penalty and corporal punishment and guarantee the protection of persons with disabilities, prohibiting any forced treatment of them and any arbitrary institutionalization of them. Also, we wish Singapore every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, President. Vietnam warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore and appreciates the presentation of its national report. Vietnam commends Singapore's continued effort to build an inclusive, cohesive, and resilient society, as well as its practical whole society approach to human rights, guided by shared responsibility and leaving no one behind. In a constructive spirit, Vietnam offers the following recommendations. 1, continue to promote inclusive digital transformation through enhanced digital literacy, online safety measures for children and lower income households. 2, further is effort to strengthen community-based support from families and older persons through accessible care services and measures that promote intergenerational solidarity. Vietnam wishes Singapore a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen.
President, we welcome the delegation of Singapore in this UPR cycle, and we commend its commitment to cooperation with the human rights instruments and the progress achieved in the field of human development, education, health, and gender security. In this slide, we recommend continued efforts to promote the human rights of all the persons in order to sustain its progress and gains and reinforce the human rights. We wish to continue this constructive dialogue with Singapore, wishing the country a successful UPR, and thank you.
To the distinguished representative of Zambia.
President, Zambia cordially welcomes the distinguished delegation of Singapore and acknowledges Singapore's strong governance framework and commendable socio-economic achievements in 60 years. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Zambia recommends that Singapore, 1, continue to enhance workplace protections relating to maternity, caregiving responsibility, and flexible work arrangements, and 2, continue efforts to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. Zambia encourages Singapore to continue its efforts to promote and protect human rights for all. We wish Singapore a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Mr. President, Zimbabwe welcomes the delegation of Singapore to the review. We commend Singapore for enacting legislation and initiatives that protect the rights and improve the well-being of its people since the last review. In a spirit of dialogue, Zimbabwe recommends the following. One, to continue strengthening its climate change resilience and adaptation policies, ensuring the protection of the right to health and safe living environment of its citizens. And two, to consider adopting legislation that criminalizes gender-based violence, including domestic violence and online violence, especially on women and girls. We wish Singapore a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished.
National report. We commend the progress achieved, especially regarding stronger social policies, enhanced access to education, healthcare, and housing. We acknowledge efforts made to address emerging challenges, including the impact of digital technologies and climate change on human rights. Albania would like to make the following recommendations. First of all, to strengthen protection for freedoms and fundamental rights, to fully guarantee freedom of religion and belief, to introduce a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its abolition, and to ensure that the use of new technologies is compliant with human rights standards. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. Algeria commends the significant progress made by Singapore since its last review. We particularly welcome the adoption of the White Paper on Singapore Women's Development in 2022 and the enactment of the Workplace Fairness Act 2025, which strengthen protection against discrimination in the professional sphere. In a constructive spirit, Algeria would like to recommend the following. 1. Continue to strengthen the inclusion of persons with disabilities. 2. Continue to implement the action plan outlined in the 2022 White Paper to further enhance the status of empowerment of women in all spheres of society. Finally, Algeria wishes the delegation of Singapore a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Angola.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Angola warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. In a constructive spirit, Angola recommends that Singapore, 1. Continue strengthening the protection of migrant workers, particularly domestic workers, in order to further safeguard their labor rights and well-being. 2. Continue enhancing measures aimed at protection children from abuse, exploitation, and online risks in line with Singapore's international commitments. 3. Further strengthen support measures for children and lower income families in order to promote equal access, education, and opportunities. We wish Singapore a successful UPR. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Armenia warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks for the constructive engagement demonstrated throughout the UPR process. We commend Singapore for its continued progress in the promotion and protection of human rights. Notable efforts include sustained measures to address gender-based violence, expand respond to gender-based violence, to further advance initiatives to safeguard the rights of children, including by enhancing protective frameworks across both digital and physical environments. We wish Singapore every success in the implementation of its human rights commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lebanon welcomes the distinguished delegation of Singapore and would like to make the following recommendations. 1, to continue efforts to empower women and enhance their representation in public and political life. 2, to further develop comprehensive policies to support active and healthy aging while expanding home-based and community care services. 3, to enhance climate preparedness and resilience. Lebanon commends Singapore's remarkable achievements in improving the well-being of its people through social cohesion and advancing economic development and quality healthcare and education. In conclusion, Lebanon wishes Singapore every success in the outcome of its Universal Periodic Review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Kingdom welcomes the introduction of the Workplace Fairness Act and its decriminalisation of same-sex acts. We urge Singapore to become party to the ICCPR, legislate against FGM, replace detention without trial with court trials, and consider mental capacity in sentencing. In the spirit of ongoing dialogue, we recommend 1, introduce a moratorium on executions and move towards abolition and removal of judicial corporal punishment. 2, mandate rest periods and create digital recruitment and wage payment processes for foreign domestic workers. 3, include protection against discrimination on the grounds of sexuality and gender identity in the Workplace Fairness Act and ensure equal treatment in government policies for LGBT+ persons. We thank the distinguished delegation for their constructive engagement today and wish them the best for the rest of their review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Azerbaijan.
Mr. President, Azerbaijan welcomes the delegation of Singapore and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. We commend Singapore's continued efforts to promote social cohesion, strengthen protection against workplace discrimination, and enhance support for vulnerable groups, including persons with disabilities, migrant workers, children, and older persons. We also note positively the adoption of the Workplace Fairness Act and measures aimed at strengthening inclusive social policies. In a constructive spirit, we recommend Singapore, 1, to continue strengthening inclusive policies and legal safeguards aimed at ensuring equal opportunities and protection from discrimination for all members of society, including persons with disabilities. 2, to further enhance access to affordable and inclusive education, healthcare, and social support services, particularly for vulnerable groups. We wish Singapore success in its review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the delegation of Singapore for its presentation and commend Singapore's continued efforts to promote a harmonious and inclusive society. We highlight Singapore's significant achievements in protecting the rights of older persons through its action plan for successful aging and commend Singapore for its leadership as chair for the Forum of Small States, promoting multilateral engagement among small states. To encourage further progress, the Bahamas respectfully recommends that Singapore, 1, continue to strengthen climate and sustainability policies while ensuring that vulnerable groups are not disproportionately affected by the impacts of low carbon transition, and 2, continue efforts to strengthen access to mental health support services, particularly for children and youth. We wish Singapore every success in this review process. And thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain.
President, we would like to wish a warm welcome to the friendly state of Singapore. We have looked at the report under the 4th UPR cycle, and we commend the participatory approach and the inclusion of all stakeholders in the process, as well as the remarkable progress achieved in the field of human rights. We have taken note of efforts made to consolidate progress further. In the context of this constructive dialogue, we would like to recommend the following: to continue to allocate sufficient funds to public health in order to improve access to quality healthcare. Secondly, to continue cooperation with regional and international human rights mechanisms in accordance with national priorities. We wish them every success.
The floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bangladesh welcomes the distinguished delegation of Singapore. We commend the government for its continued commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights. We appreciate the initiative undertaken to advance women empowerment, enhance care for older persons, and improve the well-being of migrant workers. In a spirit of constructive cooperation, Bangladesh recommends 1. Continue strengthening measures to protect the rights and ensure the safety and well-being of migrant workers, including by reinforcing social protection measures and legal safeguards. 2. Intensify efforts to combat trafficking in person and ensure protection and support for victims and survivors. We wish the delegation a very successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Thank you, Chair. Under which older persons can remain socially active. We would like to recommend, firstly, to continue encouraging mutual understanding and harmony between all ethnic and religious communities. UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Mr. President, Belgium welcomes the delegation of Singapore and recommends Singapore to ratify the International Covenant on moratorium on the death penalty, including for drug-related offenses, abolish mandatory death penalty, and ensure any death sentence meets the most serious crimes thresholds. Ratify ILO Convention 190 and align work and rest conditions for migrant domestic workers with those of other work permit holders. I thank you.
Positive initiatives and significant achievements since the last review, including enactment of key legislations as well as targeted initiatives that have contributed to advance the status of women, address needs of a rapidly aging population, and reduce income inequality. We recognize Singapore's near universal school enrollment and the Singapore Made for Families 2025 National Plan, which strengthens protections for children and supports family life. We recommend Singapore, 1, to continue its mid-career reskilling programs and related initiatives to provide older workers with greater employment security. 2, continue targeted interventions to strengthen the ecosystem of support for lower-income families. Bhutan wishes Singapore a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Botswana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Botswana warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore Act, which aims to enhance protections against discrimination faced by women in the workplace and to improve access to justice. Botswana wishes to make the following 2 recommendations to the delegation of Singapore. 1, to further
to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil welcomes the delegation of Singapore and commends its efforts in digital child safety and lifelong learning. We welcome the repeal of the strengthen labor protections for foreign domestic workers by ensuring entitlements to public holidays, regulated working hours, and paid leave, while abolishing mandatory pregnancy and HIV testing. 2, abolish mandatory corporal punishment to uphold the right to be free from cruel or degrading treatment, particularly for non-violent offenses such as immigration and labor violations. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative for Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. President. Brunei Darussalam warmly welcomes the delegation of Singapore to Geneva and thank them for the presentation of their national report. We commend Singapore for its implementation of recommendations from the previous Universal Periodic Review cycle and acknowledge ongoing efforts to promote and protect human rights through the development of an inclusive, cohesive, and resilient society. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we propose 2 recommendations. 1, continue developing and promoting active and healthy aging initiatives for older persons. And 2, further enhance policies and measures to support women's work where Singapore is successful.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bulgaria welcomes the distinguished delegation of Singapore and thanks for the comprehensive presentation of the national report and the commitment to the UPR process. We would like to commend the efforts made by Singapore in implementing the recommendations that were accepted during pre-primary education, and second, take steps to introduce free primary and secondary education for all children. We wish the delegation of Singapore a successful outcome of the review. Thank you.
Thank
We thank them for the presentation of the report. My delegation would like to congratulate Singapore on the progress made in the field of education, housing, and healthcare, on the fight against human trafficking. In a constructive spirit, and so as to further build on this progress, we would like to recommend the following. Firstly, to ensure that all children enjoy the same right to citizenship, regardless of their family situation. And secondly, to ratify the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We would like to wish Singapore a very successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Burundi.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Vice President. My delegation extends a cordial welcome to the distinguished delegation of Singapore. We wish them a very successful review. We can safely say that your country's social policy is an inspiring model of cohesion. The government's commitment to building an inclusive and united country is clear as people are encouraged to look after each other and the state spirit. Burundi would like to offer one recommendation: to consider criminalizing all forms of female genital mutilation and to continue efforts to prevent child marriage and child sexual exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cabo Verde.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. Cabo Verde the protection of children, women, and persons with disabilities. In a constructive spirit, we would like to recommend, firstly, to ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and to fully abolish the death penalty. Secondly, to establish a national independent human rights institution in keeping with international standards. And thirdly, to guarantee in the Constitution and relevant legislation the right to education for all and to prohibit corporal punishment at school. We would like to wish Singapore a very successful UPR. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cambodia.
Promote and protect human rights and the remarkable progress achieved in many areas, as highlighted in the UPR report. In the spirit of the constructive dialogue, Cambodia would like to make the following recommendation for consideration. First, continue to improve the living condition of migrant workers, including healthcare service and support for their mental health. Second, Singapore fruitful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cameroon.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. Cameroon would like to congratulate the delegation of Singapore on the presentation of its national report. We commend the country's ongoing efforts to promote an inclusive, harmonious and resilient society. Cameroon has 3 recommendations to make as follows. First of all, to continue efforts aimed at bolstering the protection for the rights of migrant workers, in particular as regards access to positions of responsibility and to reducing the wage gap. We would like to wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Firstly, to immediately establish a moratorium on executions as a provisional measure before abolishing the death penalty. Secondly, to extend the protections foreseen by the Employment Act and the Act on Compensation for Occupational Accidents to domestic workers, male and female. And thirdly, to include sexual orientation and gender identity among the grounds for protection in President, my country commends the progress achieved by Singapore in the field of the protection and promotion of human rights. In a constructive spirit, online content and cyberbullying, and thirdly, to continue efforts aimed at including persons with disabilities in the fields of education, employment, and general accessibility. The Central African Republic would like to conclude by wishing Singapore a very successful UPR review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chad.
Delegation of Singapore, and we welcome the lifting of Section 37(7)(a) of the Criminal Code, which criminalized male homosexual relationships. In a constructive spirit, Chile would like to make the following recommendations. Firstly, to ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment. Secondly, to establish an official moratorium on executions and to implement as an initial step the elimination of the mandatory imposition of the death penalty. Thirdly, to review the Act on the Protection Against Fraud and Online Manipulation and the Public Order Act so as to ensure that the struggle against disinformation does not unduly restrict the right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and the work of human rights defenders. We wish Singapore a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the
The legislative measures taken by the government to strengthen infrastructure and protect the rights of vulnerable groups such as women, children, older persons and persons with disabilities. We have two recommendations to make. Firstly, to continue promoting social equality to build a more inclusive society. Secondly, to develop social resilience and strengthen citizens' capacity to congratulate the distinguished delegation of Singapore on its progress on human rights, and we constructively recommend firstly to abolish the death penalty and in the punished or prosecuted for acts carried out while they were victims of human trafficking. Fourthly, to recognize and implement the human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. Thank you, President. Costa Rica thanks the delegation of Singapore for the presentation of its national report. We acknowledge the legislative improvements that have been made to combat discrimination against women, and we recommend, firstly, to ratify the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Secondly, to ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Thirdly, to introduce and establish coalition. We wish them a very successful implementation of the recommendations. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Côte d'Ivoire would like to commend the Government of Singapore on measures taken to promote equality at work and women's empowerment, in particular the adoption of the 2025 Act on Equality at Work, as well as the White Paper of 2022 for women's empowerment. In a constructive spirit, Côte d'Ivoire recommends to strengthen protection for fundamental freedoms, especially for religious minorities. Secondly, to consider ratifying we wish Singapore every success. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Croatia.
Mr. President, we welcome the delegation of Singapore subjection to military service and provide the possibility of civilian non-punitive alternative service for conscientious objectors. 2. Abolish the death penalty and all forms of corporal punishment as legal penalties. 3. Sign and ratify International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. We wish Singapore a successful review session. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you, President. A cordial greeting to the delegation of Singapore. To continue fostering the active aging centres, which enable active participation by older persons in learning and physical activities. Secondly, to keep up the solid robust results on early education and healthcare as key pillars for the enjoyment of human rights. To continue national efforts to ensure equal access to digital technologies. We wish Singapore every success in this review and in the implementation of the recommendations it will accept. I thank you.
Opportunities in the workplace and to criminalize racist hate speech and hate crimes. Cyprus recommends that Singapore 1 ratify the ICSCR, the Convention Against Torture, the ICCPR, including its abilities are adequately protected from violence, exploitation, and abuse. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia.
And child pornography and encourage its ratification. To further advance human rights, we recommend that Singapore 1. Establish a moratorium on executions. And 3. Strengthen the protection of the freedoms of expression, assembly, and association, including by ensuring an enabling environment for civil society and human rights defenders. We wish Singapore a constructive
Republic of Singapore to this UPR cycle. My delegation wishes Singapore greater success in its future endeavor for the promotion and protection of human rights of its rights of children, older persons, and persons with disabilities at all levels. We wish Singapore every success in this review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Level delegation of Singapore and thanks it for the various institutional and legal reforms made, and this has enabled it to also take targeted policies online violence to effectively combat violence against women and girls by particularly focusing on the punishment of perpetrators. We wish full success to Singapore in its review. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the many constructive comments made thus far. Many delegations have spoken of the need to provide more labour protections for migrant workers. Highlight some of the more recent initiatives introduced to improve protections for our migrant labour force. My colleague from the Ministry of Home Affairs, Mr. Gregory
manpower in Singapore. My colleague had earlier outlined Singapore's efforts to foster inclusive and fair workplaces for all workers. Now, I will speak about how Singapore has continued they build our homes and critical infrastructure, provide various daily services, and help care for our loved ones. They choose to work in Singapore, and it is our responsibility to safeguard their interests, support them, and provide for their well-being. According to 2 studies conducted by my ministry in 2024, over 9 in 10 are satisfied working and living in Singapore and would recommend Singapore as a place to work. This reflects Singapore's continual commitment to do more for our migrant workers. Since our last UPR in 2021, we have amended our laws and adopted practical measures and policies to further protect the rights and well-being of Singapore. But we have taken concrete and continuing steps to do so. Under our laws, employers must provide proper housing for their migrant workers, many of whom live in dormitories. Since 2023, we have extended our laws to cover all dormitories. With government support to meet these higher standards. The government is also designing dormitories with residents' needs in mind to improve their lived experience. Through regular consultations with migrant workers, we understand that they would like quiet spaces within the dormitories to rest and communal areas to connect with one another. We have taken their feedback on recommendations to strengthen protections for migrant workers and migrant domestic workers. Singapore is committed to ensuring that the rights of all migrant workers are protected in law and backed by rigorous enforcement, as well as practical avenues of support. We implement this through our Employment of Foreign Manpower Act and its regulations, which provide dedicated protection to migrant workers and which complement key labor laws, such as the Employment safeguards tailored to the specific circumstances of migrant workers. For instance, Singapore recognizes that domestic workers require additional protection, given that they live and work in their employers' homes. As such, employers of domestic workers are legally required to provide proper accommodation, food and rest, including weekly rest days, and purchase medical and personal accident insurance for their domestic workers. We have strengthened these protections under the law. Our courts may impose enhanced penalties of up to twice the usual maximum punishment where the offender is the domestic worker's employer, a member of the employer's household, or the employment agent. Mr. President, beyond legislation, we have put in place a strong support ecosystem for migrant workers. Every migrant worker who is new to Singapore attends a settling in program conducted in their native language, where they learn about their employment rights as well as avenues available to seek help. We also have channels to identify migrant workers who need more support and offer them help. For example, HealthServe, an NGO in Singapore with government support, runs a 24-hour multilingual helpline offering counseling services for migrant workers. In terms of and access unlimited consultations for common acute illnesses, care for chronic conditions, annual health screenings, and 24-hour telemedicine. The clinics are located close to where they live, and we plan to increase the number of clinics so that care is made even more accessible. Since these improvements, 9 and 10 migrant workers surveyed found consultations to be affordable and accessible. In sum, Singapore's approach has been to bolster the protection of migrant workers' rights and well-being live in. Migrant workers have made and will continue to make valuable contributions to the Singapore story. I thank you.
Singapore was ranked as the safest country in the world for the 12th time in the Gallup 2025 Global Safety Report. This ranking reflects the everyday reality that in Singapore, every resident can walk home alone late at night without worry. In the 2025 World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, Singapore's civil and criminal frameworks were ranked 6th and 8th, respectively, for effective enforcement. These positive outcomes are the obligations under international law. This includes the use of capital punishment for the most serious crimes, against the use of capital punishment when it is imposed